Shalom Aleichem. We're learning the Sicha of Kedoshim Beis, which is based on the farbrengen that the Rabbi had on Shabbos Parshas Kedoshim Mevarchim Achodesh Iyar Tavshin Chav Zayin, literally just a month before the 6-day war. And a big part of the farbrengen ended up being about Ahavas Yisroel, as we see from already. What ois are we going to start from? We're going to start from ois tes. And we'll see that how many ideas the Rabbi spoke about Ahavas Yisroel, which are quite fascinating. Here we go. The Rabbi started off in saying, in regards to Ahavas Yisroel, there's a statement of Rabbi Kiva on the pasuk after Kamecha Zegla Godo Bater, like Rashi brings up, and this follows what we spoke about Achin Shal Pesach. On Achin Shal Pesach that year, the Rabbi spoke about Achdos of Pesach, that the four sons all come together and everyone gets united, and specifically on the last days of Pesach, it's even a bigger level of unity, because the first days of Pesach, there's a difference between the Chacham and the Sheni Yedei Lishol, but it's Torah that brings them together. However, on the last days of Pesach, it's not even Torah bringing together. A maidservant saw at Kriyas Yamsuf something that the great Nevi'im didn't see. In other words, that the vision of Elikus was literally to every single one with no difference. Like it says regarding when Mashiach comes in the Sefer Yoel, that I will spill my ruach, I'll spill my spirit on all flesh, and your children and your sons and daughters will be prophets. Even people who don't have their own metzias, that according to Chassidus. What's a ben ubas? Somebody that's only the child of somebody. They're just a mekabel. They don't have their own identity. They'll also be able to prophesy. Therefore, it says, Az Yashir Moshe Bnei Yisrael. Why singular? So Chassidus explains, because if all Yidden will be at the level of Moshe, Yashir Lashon Yachid, not Yashir. Amazing. Now this Achdus is felt more by Achnei Shel Pesach, because they all eat matzah shtuya, we eat gebraks, no difference to the people, whatever level standard of Pesach you have, etc. And so much so you could even eat chametz if your Sudas Mashiach goes late into the night. So based on this, we'll learn a Rashi that's connected to Ahavas Yisroel. And in continuation to that, there's also the explanations about Ahavas Yisroel in the Sefer Derech Mitzvah Secha of the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Likutei Torah, Heicholtzu, and then the famous Heicholtzu of the other Rabbeim, specifically the Rebbe Rashab. And on top of all that, the explanation of the Alter Rebbe and Tanya Perek Lamed Beis. So basically, the whole farbrengen becomes like an Ahavas Yisroel farbrengen. Then the Rebbe went in to explain the Sicha. The L'chuda, like we learned in the Sicha, it's not understood, because there's the mitzvah of Havtei Kamecha. Why do you need the other commandments of stealing, etc., and other mitzvahs? The Rebbe said over there, also, why do you need the effort for the Ben Chamesh Lamikra? He has to make an effort to learn all those mitzvahs. If he could just learn it on one leg, similar to what the Ger said, teach my Torah while I'm standing on one leg, and Hillel said, that which you don't want done to your friend, that which you hate for yourself, don't do to your friend, and that's the whole Torah. Why do we have to go unpack it for the child? Another thing that Rebbe adds, why do you need a special tzivui? All the mitzvahs ben Adam lechaveri, he says, so too mitzvahs kibud avaim. You could use the logic, after treat others the way you want to treat yourself. He says, just like when you grow older, you want your kids to honor you. You honor your parents. By the way, it's a great logic why to do the mitzvah. Yeah, and therefore Rashi explains that's a glal gadol b'Torah, and the Torah has the pratim as well. And then the Rebbe went on to explain that Rashi did not bring what Hillel said, that which you hate, don't do to others, and that's the whole Torah. Why? The Rebbe explained, because b'pashtus this is not kol Torah klula, it's rather a klal of b'mitzvahs ben adam l'chaverei, zela, neva, niu for those mitzvahs. The Rebbe went to explain, even if you would say that the statement of Hillel and the statement of Rabbi Kiva are the same thing, but rather the statement of Hillel is negating and the statement of Hillel is positive. In other words, one's in a negative approach, one's in a positive approach. Rashi should have brought two. And this is still in the question that the Rebbe asked. And you can't say that Rashi brought the statement of Rabbi Kiva because he's explaining only this pasuk, because Rashi doesn't in general bring Divrei Chazal, which they explain on the psukim, but rather Pshutei Shal Mikra. So he could have brought the explanation of Hillel, even if it's not going in this pasuk, because over there it's even more focused idea of Ahavas Yisroel Kol HaTorah Kula and not just Klal Gadol B'Torah. And the Rebbe says, before he gives the answer that he said that it's not Kol HaTorah Kula because it's only B'nadon L'Chaver, the Rebbe said you can't say that Rashi feels that the Chiyuv of Ahavta L'Recha Kamecha is only Reyacha, your friend. In other words, your standard of Torah mitzvahs. And therefore, he didn't bring the statement of Hillel, which goes on all Bnei Yisrael. In other words, that Hillel says it goes for all Yidden. And Rabbi Akiva only says for your friends. And therefore, Rashi holds it's only on your friends. Why? Because the fact that Rashi does not explain the differences between Reyacha, Mischa, Chicha, which other commentaries do. So it's understood that Pshatei Shamika, there's no difference. It's all friendship. So V'ahavta L'Recha Kamecha means not only L'Reyacha, but to everybody. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Lamed Beis. So therefore, the Rebbe came to the answer he offered. Then the Rebbe said that on the point that it's not Kol HaTorah Kula, the idea of Dalach Sani, the Rebbe says, if the mitzvah of Avtzon Kamecha would be Kol HaTorah Kula, then it should have pushed off other mitzvahs, just like Bigok Nevesh pushes off other mitzvahs. But we see that Ahavas Yisroel has to be Al Pi Gidvei Torah. And like we're going to say later, it has to be Makarvan LaTorah, not the other way around. So from here you see it's not Kol HaTorah Kula, but rather it's a Klal Gadol B'Torah. Yeah, then the Rebbe finished off the Sicha, not the Sicha, but this part. That Rashi explains that it brings the name of the person who said it to Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva says it's not Kamecha Mamish, because your life comes first, etc. And Rabbi Akiva says Chavivni Sol Shniklu Banim Lamakayim. So therefore, you can have a feeling of Abba to everybody, regardless of any level that you say. Now, on the point that Rabbi Akiva says Chavivin Yisrael, that's besides the regular Chavivus that happens to every guy. That's the first part of the Mishnah. Chaviv Adav Shnivda B'Tzelem goes to everybody, but specifically Yisrael. And on the point that says Niklu Banim Lamakim, says there's a fascinating footnote over here that the Rebbe said at the Sicha that Rabbi Akiva is one of those people who held that all children are Bnei Malachim. In Gemara and Shabbos in Daf Chav Ches, it quotes various Tanoim that believed Kol Yisrael Bnei Malachim, and it brings proof. Now, when it comes to the proof of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, it says like this. It says in a Braisa, if somebody owed 1,000 mana, which a mana is 100 zuz, so 1,000 mana is 100,000. That's a lot of money. And he was wearing a piece of clothing that's super rich, 1/10 of that. So 100. Okay, in other words, 10,000 times 100. Sorry, 100 times 100. So 10,000, yeah, not 100,000, 10,000. So you take off, according to the first opinion, not Rabbi Akiva, you take off this clothing and you give him something which he's deserving. In other words, you sell this piece of clothing and he can wear something cheaper. But Tana Mishum Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva says no. Kol Yisrael lo yin lo'isa, it's the law. According to Rabbi Akiva, every Jew deserves to wear something that's worth kuf money. So you can't take it off; he's deserving. And from here, you see Kol Yisrael b'nei Malachim that nothing's too expensive for him. Says the Rebbe like this: think for this for a moment. Regarding the clothing of the Kohen Gadol when he walks into Kedoshim on Yom Kippur, which has to be beautiful, the Gemara in Yuma says that its worth was 12 mana or 18 mana. And over here, Rabbi Akiva comes and says that a simple Yid, an ani ve'evian, a poor Jew, that's why he needed a loan, physically poor, even luchniistic poor, who took an alva, so that he could, what did he take the alva? So he could get, that those years, Never would talk about getting a carpet from wall to wall. Never would often tease about it. He needs to get a carpet from wall to wall. Still, this Yid is deserving of an itztala, a cloak, worth a kuf mana because he's a ben melech. So from here you see that Akiva says that we're talking banim lamakim. Just unbelievable. I mean, first of all, just that nekuda, just stay with that. What it means to love a Yid. And what it means that a Yid deserves everything. Then the Rebbe continued in the Sicha regarding Ahavas Yisroel. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that if you make your guf ikar and your nefesh tafel, in other words, you prioritize your guf, then you can't have real Ahavas Yisroel. But you have to have the flip side. So from here is understood that in order to have true Ahavas Yisroel, you only have to make the guf tafel secondary. You don't have to totally remove it. Adarabah, you need the guf. because the love has to manifest in the real physical flesh. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe says, just like Ahavas Hashem has to permeate your heart in a physical way, so too Ahavas Yisroel has to permeate your physical heart. Literally, it makes you feel good. And you cannot compare the simcha of a neshama to the simcha mitzad guf. In other words, if it's only mitzad neshama, it's not going to manifest in your guf. It has to be literally physical. So in other words, your guf has to be tough, but it has to exist. And that's why we say l'chaim. That's literally you give l'chaim, it's a simcha for the guf, not for the nefesh, because the simcha sa nefesh doesn't come from a piece of whiskey, from a drop of whiskey. But dafka, when you make the guf happy, to eat meat, wine, etc., then the guf goes to sleep, doesn't bother the neshama, and on the contrary, it helps. And therefore, by farbrengens we say l'chaim, but not a lot. This is after the Rebbe came up with the Gzeira a few years earlier, that you're not supposed to drink more than 4, and that mashka, the Rebbe quotes the Frierdiker Rebbe, that mashka is disgusting, but we don't want to talk about it on Shabbos. Yeah, and why? Because l'chaim brings people closer. Zol zayin l'chaim live. And the Rebbe smiled after he drank l'chaim. He says, "I didn't do this on behalf of anyone. I'm not moitzi chayv anybody." So everyone else said l'chaim. Then the Rebbe said that there's a famous chakira, there's a investigative question by the chaykrim. How can you come from negative to positive? What the Torah says is obviously in a philosophical perspective, how lack can turn into existence. So the Torah explains that when you understand a lot about what Hashem isn't, you could somehow come to understand a drop what He is. Because we know that in understanding Eibishter, we could only have Yidilas Shlila. But even from Yidilas Shlila, the Alter Rebbe says you could come to a bit of Yidilas Achiv. So what do you see from here? I have a perfect proof. Why? Because when I said something negative, that I'm not going to be mitzi anyone with my l'chaim, suddenly it became a positive, everyone said l'chaim. And just like we said earlier about Ahavas Yisroel, that through the negating, don't do unto others what you don't want done to yourself, you come to the positive of Avtzon Kamecha. Then the Rebbe went on to explain the chassidus of the Sicha that we learned, having Tamid Shalar and Oiv Shalom Mekavan L'Torah, etc. That even the mila of the essential mila of Yidden, which is higher than Torah, has to come through Torah. Then the Rebbe went on to say, let's focus on the idea of being mitalmid of Shal Aaron. Aaron was not only a kohen, but he was a kohen gadol, and he had multiple definitions. Before he came into the Beis Hamikdash, he had to make sure that there was no tumah at all, not even a kazayas of a corpse, and he had to make sure to know if he could eat there b'tahara. In other words, in the ultimate level of purity, which is the level of kohen gadol. But nevertheless, even Aaron, who had to be on such a high level and so careful, and so many boundaries, that this didn't hold him back from behaving in the way of Oyev Shalom, V'Leiv Shalom to every Yid. Like we've said, like it's explained a few times. The Aaron is the matri, the Shishvina, the Matanis. In other words, he's the Shishvina is the maid of the woman. In other words, he's nukva, feminine. He's elevating. He brings up Neshamas Yisrael without any difference. Therefore, it says by Aaron, everybody cried when he passed away, men and women, not by Moshe that only the men died, because he was B'chinas HaGvura. But the point is, Aaron HaKohen did this without giving up to Torah and mitzvahs. And the lesson from all this is that we all have to be Mamleches Kohenim, and we have to bring everybody V'dakei Shalom, V'dakei Noya. Now, from here, included in this lesson from Aaron is that what we learn in the Medrash, that when he would go down the road and he would see a Rasha, he would say Shalom. The next day, the person was wanted to do an Aveda. He said, Oili, Oi, how can I pick up my eyes and see Aaron? I'm embarrassed of him. He gave me hello. And that person would stop from an Aveda. And this is similar to what explains that there's a kind of serving Hashem from ego. Like the famous story of the Chassid Alter Rebbe that said, Pasnik, how can a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe behave like this? And therefore he was able to be, even in Petersburg, which was a very, very materialistic city. And then they would continue a few more nekudas about Ahavas Yisroel, but we'll stop here. You could check up the actual Sicha for all the details.